It's really hard to make sense of the events of Jesus' life told in our lessons today. There's a whiplash kind of paradox that one day Jesus is riding into Jerusalem triumphant, while crowds chant Hosanna in the highest, and only a few days later the crowd turns on him by demanding the murderer Barabbas be released instead of Jesus. Is there any better mirror into human nature than these stories side by side? The stories reveal that we want it both ways. We want our leader, our Savior, to hold incompatible qualities. We crave the radically loving, merciful, and accepting leader who gathers the outcasts and sinners and throws open their arms to all prodigals return. But we also want our leader to be powerful, to assert dominion over Pilate and the forces of Rome and all who oppress. We want our leaders to be mighty on our behalf, and if they start to look weak, like they can't save us after all, we turn on them. Similarly, we want to see ourselves as loving servants. But when we find ourselves frustrated or under threat, many of us will defend ourselves with a show of power, aggressive tones, arguments, and accusations. Our mixed feelings about dominance and sacrificial love are very apparent in our theological language, in our hymns, in our prayer book, where we use words like almighty and dominion alongside words proclaiming justice and peace and mercy. We want to be like Jesus, but when we are afraid, our human nature defaults to dominance and defense. I don't know about you, but I long to be beyond this as a species. 2,000 years after Jesus' crucifixion, I want us to tick this one off as a lesson that we've already learned and start being better. I want to read the story as a thing of the past, not a thing that keeps happening. I want the arc of justice to bend further and faster towards justice. And whenever violence breaks out in the world, I feel sad that humans are not there yet. Not closer to the reign of God, and unable yet to see that Jesus' way of self-sacrifice and the mutual compromise it requires of us is the only path towards peace and mutual thriving. Or maybe we do see it. We know it's true, but we're unwilling to go first, unable that the other side will not take advantage of our vulnerability when we act with nonviolence. Realistically, of course, it's much easier for me to uphold these ideals at a distance from violence, with no direct connection and nothing personally at stake except my hope and longing for peace. But for those embroiled in wars and territorial conflicts and living with the immediate fear and oppression and trauma, the sacrificial love and mercy that could lead to peace don't seem like viable options. And who am I to judge when much smaller things make me defensive? When the Jews were marching into Jerusalem for Passover, and Jesus entered alongside them on a colt, this was a religious celebration. We heard a little bit about it from Rabbi Moshe last week when he was here, and he even had us singing Go Down Moses to talk about the celebration of the story of the Exodus and what that means in the Jewish community. So they're excited to celebrate. It's a religious celebration, but it's also a political occasion for them. It's like a march for a cause or a political parade. They were excited to celebrate the salvation that God had brought them through the Exodus and the salvation from the Romans that they hoped for. And the Romans knew that. They were on edge, fearing that this excitement would lead to a revolt. Last week, some members of Holy Family were out marching for justice too, standing in opposition to the unjust actions of our government. It's scary to stand up right now. So thank you on behalf of everyone who is longing for liberation and true peace. Those actions matter. For many years at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church over in San Mateo, it was my job to choreograph a mime of the story of Jesus' journey to the cross. It was a mime of the Stations of the Cross. A mime. With 8th graders in full face paint and black clothes, and Jesus was wearing white. I did not start this tradition, but it was a long and sacred one at the school where I was the chaplain, and I needed to carry it on. When the crowd chanted, "Crucify him," the 8th grade mimes were up in the church choir stalls, and they weren't speaking, narrators were reading, but they were pumping their fists, right, to crucify him. It was really hard. I mean, it's 8th graders. It's this time of year in the 8th grade. It was really hard to get them to pay attention to each other enough to synchronize their motions, right? And then to keep that rhythm. But once they did, it was chilling. It was such a frightening reminder of what happens when we unite with the mob mentality. Scapegoating the innocent and those who tell the truth. But it's possible, these stories today remind us, it's possible to unite for good as well. To raise our hands in support for what is right. At the Pride Parade coming up in Half Moon Bay in June, at the training some of you have done to support trans folks and immigrants, for the folks that were in that protest last weekend, for the last AIDS life cycle that has been cycling right here down Highway 1 for so many years, and this year is the last. It's possible for us to lift up our palm branches and say, "Hosanna," even as others raise their fists and say, "Crucify him." Even when we know that today's story ends with crucifixion, with the seeming death of the one who embodied generous and radical love, it's possible to keep saying Hosanna because we know that the cross is not really the end. And it's possible, as we wait for that arc to bend further and faster, to keep working on ourselves, to tame our instincts, to exercise power coercively, and defend ourselves aggressively. It's possible instead to embody that radical ethic born in an early church in the Roman Empire so long ago. It's possible to show with our words and our actions and our very lives that peace is possible, that love and service really work, and that self-sacrifice may seem like a defeat, but in fact, it is the greatest victory. The victory that comes on Easter. The triumph of a love so strong that it has dominion over death. I don't know how long it will take until that arc of justice bends enough. Until all Christians truly live according to what we say we believe. And love and service is embraced by the whole earth. But until then, we must keep raising our palms and proclaiming what Jesus has shown us. Peace and God's loving and merciful justice are the only way that any of us can really be strong or really be safe. Hosanna to the King of Love.